can't see you.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and today we're going to be discussing historical parallels. With us today are Monica Colbert, James Hearn, Thaddeus Paul Hamas. Welcome, panel. In 1923, Hitler initiated a violent coup attempt in Munich, which failed, resulting in his conviction for treason with a 5-year prison sentence, of which he served 9 months. 9 years later, Hitler achieved his goal of absolute power in Germany and kept it until his death in 1945. Trump was already president when he attempted his failed coup in 2021. Trump did not have the absolute power that Hitler managed to seize by 1933. So at this setting, he is no longer in office. Since Trump's failed coup attempt, his behavior has followed Hitler's playbook of rallies, agitation, lies, and bullying anyone who does not declare absolute homage to his magnificence. We have clear historical records of what happened to Germany after 12 years of a Hitler dictatorship. Is it reasonable to project a similar fate for America if Trump manages to regain the presidency? What do you think will happen if Trump runs again and wins the presidency? Jim, he's already running again. He's already made his announcement. What's your prediction of what we're going to be left with if he wins?
Well, the short answer to that is what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks. If it doesn't disqualify him, gets us to the point where, in my opinion, the good guys could run Daffy Duck and beat this guy.
Yeah,
if he gets the nomination. I saw a piece of film on the day that Trump announced his candidacy. Biden was standing on a platform with Macron. I think it was Macron, and that was one of the questions from the audience. They said, "We just heard that Trump declared his candidacy. What do you think of that?" And Biden turned to Macron, and Macron turned to him, and they both smirked. They just, if I were in a position to dictate who got to be the nominee from the Republican side, I would love to see Trump get the nomination. And so do a lot of other people at this point in time. He's just basically gone over I was talking about Hitler and his psychosis. He's just gone over the edge. And so the short answer to that is, I'm not worried about that at all.
Yeah, he's going to lose if he gets the nomination. Yeah. He's going to lose. Okay, Thaddeus, you worried at all about Trump becoming president again?
Well, not terribly, but I did jot down at the beginning of my notes on this question that personally, if that does happen, if he becomes president again, you'll find me shopping for real estate in some other country. But what's most encouraging to me about the other side of that, what made Macron and Biden smirk at each other at the idea of this guy becoming president again, is the last couple of months, we've seen kind of a steady drumbeat of some of his biggest supporters, his most slavish acolytes tiptoeing away and not having anything further to do with him. And, what's been seen publicly is how many of the people that he promoted for the 2022 midterms did not win. And it's kind of like his blessing has become kind of a political kiss of death. So he himself, I think, has a snowball's chance of winning.
Monica, you have any concerns about Trump?
Not really. And I watched beginning of November. I watched his announcement on Fox, and it was laughable. He went on and on. He spouted verbiage, which was, intended to speak to his base and further divide. He's still using verbiage of, China virus and this and that regarding COVID and just immigration and doing all sorts of like dog whistles to his base. I had to turn it off because it was just such ridiculousness. And he used the same 5 words, for 20 minutes. No, he's becoming a joke to his party, especially what Thaddeus just said. Most of the people he backed in these midterm elections did not win. Was supposed to be the great, red flood or what have you, and it was more like a pink haze or what have you. So he's losing traction in his party. He's losing the faith of some of his long-term supporters, and I think that his running is only going to serve to weaken his party. And now we have Pence just announcing that he'll make his announcement whether he's running or not after the holidays. So I think if Pence is in the race, I just think Trump is becoming lower and lower on the totem pole of people that take him seriously.
Okay, my prediction is that unless he's in cuffs in an orange jumpsuit by the time the election rolls around, he will get the Republican nomination, because you have a whole bunch of people jumping in. You have Pence, Cotton, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Chris Christie. They're all going to jump in and they're going to split the vote. And in the primary, Trump will probably get the nomination. But I agree with y'all. He will get creamed in the general. So my prediction. Sticking with Hitler and the Nazis, during his entire rise to power, the Nazis were never the election majority winners. Even after Hitler as chancellor took over the government's election machinery, which included over 50,000 black and brown shirt election monitors, jailing thousands of Social Democrat and Communist Party leaders, banning scores of newspapers, breaking into and beating up gatherings of other parties, he still only managed 44% of the vote in the March 1933 national election. See where I'm going here? Given what we have witnessed since Trump lost in 2020 and recently in the 2022 midterms, are you more worried or relieved about the possibility that this 235-year-old experiment still has a chance to succeed? Monica, I think you might have left us, but give you a chance to come back. So we'll go to Jim first. You think we're still in good shape here as far as the entire nation? All right, Monica, we'll go to you with that, and then Jim later.
Okay.
You were optimistic from the get-go and remain optimistic. So are you, here's the basis of my question here. Trump lost to Hillary Clinton by 3 million votes, yet he still managed, due to a quirk in our system, win the Electoral College vote and became president. So they basically go after these swing states, places where it's going to be close. They're not going to spend any money in New York or California, but they will in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Georgia and other places where it's going to be close. So does that worry you at all, Monica?
And this doesn't necessarily get to the heart of your question, but my more immediate concern is more about overall voter disenfranchisement.
Mm-hmm.
And what is happening with that in terms of voter suppression. And in fact, in Pennsylvania, which kind of speaks to your question, just during the midterms, there was a question on the ballot about voting, and it was about mail-in voting. So I'm concerned with what is happening immediately that is a threat to the voices of the people. So mail-in voting, rezoning, all sorts of voting disenfranchisement in terms of, incarcerated people who are free in many states still, do not have their voting rights restored to them. Stacey Abrams, and who's one of my just all-time heroes and angels, has done so much work for this in Georgia and around the world. I think that is a more immediate concern that affects the big picture.
Yeah, the concern is really clear in Georgia because you had all these people standing in line for days and days and days because they basically made voting by mail so difficult. And what's really scary about it was that Herschel Walker came so close. That was frightening.
Yes.
Okay, Jim, you don't vote. I think from our conversation we had earlier, you mentioned that you don't vote. So what do you say about Monica's concerns about voter suppression?
Well, if I'm correct in saying that there is an ultimate force behind elections, which is money, I think we first have to ask ourselves how the actual vote is taken and how it's counted and what it really means. Here in Wisconsin is a very odd state in a lot of different ways. We just finished what's been called the dirtiest campaign in the country. Now, that may be hard to believe, but from my perspective, it was about as nasty as you could possibly get, the vote for senator. That campaign pitted the third wealthiest elected official against a sincere, my mother was a teacher and my father was a third shift worker candidate. I've met the candidate, and he's a guy that was honest. He was a guy that you could believe in if you believed in those things. Here's the point. Both candidates made those positions, wealth and humility, into reasons the candidates were unfit to be senators. Until the final 3 days, nothing was ever even said about either of the candidates, about what the candidates would propose to accomplish if they were elected. Nobody in this state cared at all about that. 98% of the campaign was all about how evil the other side is or was or intends to be. This is both sides. This is not just the one side. It was a dirty campaign. The same commercials aired about 1,000 times in the last few months. Those who would have been affected by those probably were affected in the first 2 weeks. Throughout history, elections have been ultimately decided by the vote of the people who have been too busy just trying to survive or who cannot afford the Disney Channel. Their vote is based on what they are given or promised. Bread is given. Promises, though, are always forgotten. Here, more bread was given. You can see where I'm going with this. And nothing was promised by the rich guy who won. The bulk of the attack ads were actually true about this guy. He promised to retire after his first 2 elections. This was his third. The other guy actually, the other candidate actually showed this guy telling women to move if they didn't like his stand on abortion rights. And they showed him actually saying that his company benefited by legislation he himself promoted. And finally, they even showed him saying Wisconsin has enough jobs. And he won. Okay, why did he win? You can blame whomever you want as to why the right guy didn't win. It was a close election. You can blame whoever you want as to why the right guy didn't win here. But in the end, the only thing that mattered was wealth.
I beg to differ, and I'm going to cite a bunch of names right now that have something in common, and they were all losers. Val Demings, Stacey Abrams, Cherry Beasley, your guy, Mandela Barnes. All those people lost their elections, and they were all, in my mind, heavily superior to the people who beat them, and that is they all shared the same race, which is something that you didn't mention when you were talking about this particular contest. That's my view. I think we still have to get past the idea that we're going to vote for somebody because they're the same race as we are, instead of voting for the better candidate. So, Thaddeus, I'm going to go to you on this now.
Okay.
So, give me your
All right.
beef.
All right, I want to jump back to Monica's mention of Stacey Abrams.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say she has given me more hope about the future of representative democracy here, because, well, in Georgia, they seem to have more restrictions, and they're still piling on additional restrictions to basically keep the people of color from voting. And despite that, no matter how much they piled on these voters, they came and they told them, you can only vote on these 2 days. Well, they lined up on those 2 days. They, millions of people made damn sure that they got their ballots in, no matter what restrictions were placed on them. The only thing that they can do next is to say, okay, people of color can no longer legally vote. And that probably wouldn't work in any state. But, that kind of, if we had 50 Stacey Abramses operating in each of the states, we would have people literally making sacrifices to participate in this democracy. And that's probably the example that the voters of Georgia gave us. They endured a lot of pain to get their votes in, and it mattered. And even though the win was a squeaky one, we've got to say that the guy who's going to do the job was the one who got elected.
Barely.
Yeah, barely, but he got there.
He did, yeah. And I'm pleased about that. The idea of empire seems to be a recurring theme throughout world history. There was Persia, Alexander, Rome, the Mongols, and later the Ottomans in ancient times, none of them lasting. After Columbus's discovery, we have European colonialism, establishing French, Spanish, Portuguese, English, and Dutch empires in the Western Hemisphere, Africa, and large parts of Asia. That, along with the Ottomans, which went by the wayside after a couple of world wars. Not deterred by over 100 million war fatalities in those two imperialistic military endeavors, those two world wars. The Cold War, after that, basically carved the planet into two empires, the American and the Soviet. Since then, wars in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan have produced zero wins for America. The Soviet Empire hasn't fared all that well in the same time frame, but that hasn't changed Putin's thinking, as evidenced by the latest invasion of Ukraine. As long as strongmen, be they kings or dictators, continue to manage to become heads of state, will we ever get past the notion of the aspiration of world domination and the many war casualties that follow? Or will future civilizations finally conclude that home rule democratic systems are a more preferred method of social organization? Thaddeus, do you think democracy is ever going to make its way into the thinking of government systems?
That's hard to say, but I was just looking over some of the comments that I had earlier. I want to throw them out and go to the second half of them. that, despots come into power, or at least, when there is voting as part of the system, they come into power by promising some kind of a better life for the people, and the people believe them. The magic trick that can't be worked is to level out human intelligence so that everybody is just as smart as everybody else, and nobody who is smarter can come in and hoodwink a whole clump of people who will allow them to take power. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it's kind of the greatest thing about us, and the worst is that all power ultimately has to come from the people, because we allow it to happen. And if we get to the point where we can, be smart enough to see the dictator when he's still running for office and not vote for him, or if we can develop a level of public compassion in which the people who do see the danger coming take action to protect the people who don't, we're not going to see much progress.
Okay. Monica, a lot of the text in that question referred to colonialism, and it seems like those great colonial empires, the European nations that developed them, that I cited, have all gone by the wayside. Portugal no longer controls Brazil. The British Empire is a shadow of its former self, and same with the Dutch and the Spanish. So do you think that eventually came out as, a positive development of home rule, or just something that was going to occur anyway?
I think the dissolution of the idea of empire and colonialism is definitely something of the past. Even though we sit in the U.S. still with territories of, Puerto Rico, and still have our hands in the trenches of the Philippines or what have you. But I think, the days of going to war for strictly territory, although, we still have Israel and Palestine, and obviously Russia and Ukraine. We still have that occurring. So
it's still here, but you think it's on the wane?
It's still here, but I think it's on the way out. And I think, Thaddeus is talk about compassion and where human beings are right now, and in terms of intelligence, I'm going to be optimistic and lean on the side that we are an intelligent, not society, but just global nation. And that, if we are going to war, I hope in the past we've had examples that it's more towards humanitarian actions and to help and to support, rather than to claim and rather than to support autocrats or dictators who are just pure inspired by greed. So I like to think that's on the way out, and that's of the past, and that we are becoming a world that is just more concerned with being equals and living, in the words of Oprah, our best lives.
Jim, Thaddeus made an interesting point when he said that even in the autocratic societies, nations, that it's the people who allow that to happen, who allow the authoritarian strongman to take charge of the country. So actually, home rule does exist even in places where they have that. So what do you say about that?
Well, interestingly enough, Congress voted in the last couple of days not to give Puerto Rico a chance to rule themselves.
Mhm.
They can't declare themselves a state. They can't secede from the union, as we say. And yet, and so our Congress has decided that at least that part of it is not something we're going to tolerate. My perspective on the human issue is this. I also read about a week or so ago that there are now 8 billion human beings on the planet. I'm old. I remember a long time ago thinking that 3 billion was a great big number. And that was when I was in grade school. So if you just think about what 8 billion anything constitutes, certainly the idea of world domination, other than Mike Myers movies, is a virtual impossibility. But here's my point. There was another article I read that says that scientists, we all like scientists, have put forth the idea that the reason we have never been able to encounter any other advanced civilization might be what they are calling the Great Filter. That idea states that all levels of higher intelligence, like Earth empires, always self-destruct. Besides the possibility of natural disasters, we got that one solved. We're taking target practice at asteroids these days. But if you take away natural disasters from the equation, the most likely things that could stop this civilization, they said, nuclear war, pandemic, climate change, or runaway artificial intelligence. The whole object is, if this is what humans or people or sentient beings are like, the natural propensity of these situations is that we don't live long enough. And if that's the case, before we don't live long enough to meet somebody on Aldebaran, we're certainly not going to live long enough to avoid our own self-destruction. My answer to that, without being pessimistic, I'm not going to be here that long. That's pessimistic, isn't it? It goes back to the money. What is running things right now? What has probably run things forever? I believe that there was a critical mass of wealth achieved somewhere, and I think we come to that in another question. And from that point in time, it's always been a matter of who controls that wealth and how they do it. The way they're doing it, the way they're operating, I think in our society here right now is stalemate. 50-50 in the legislature. That's stalemate. What legislation gets passed? None. What has been passed in the last 20 years? None. We've been at stalemate forever. Why is there a stalemate? It is better for them and more profitable for them to have our legislators and our legislations not pass any rules. If there aren't any rules, it's easier to steal. And I'm saying this from a perspective that I've always had, keeping in mind that I am now retired, but I was essentially Wall Street for 43 years. I know how the money works. I know how it's been getting easier and easier and easier to steal it. And there are less and less and less consequences to that. Matter of fact, I'll just end it with this. My mantra in the last 5 or 10 years of working for a Wall Street firm was, we know they're all crooks. We just want to be on their side. And I think that addresses to my way of thinking, that addresses what's really going on here. Hopefully that's not too pessimistic. I could be optimistic. I could be optimistic if, in fact, the moneyed interests can make more money being positive and honest than they can by stealing it.
Amen. In an 1853 sermon, abolitionist minister Theodore Parker issued a famous quote that was often repeated by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." We can't deny that there have been a number of historical events that sent civilization in that direction. In 1215, the Magna Carta helped blunt the tyranny of King John. It became the first time since the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire that a teeny tiny bit of democracy was infused in monarchy rule. Here in America, after 246 years, slavery became illegal in 1865. And even though white supremacy made a big comeback with the end of Reconstruction and a century of Jim Crow, the civil rights movement did make some progress by the 1970s. Women's rights made advancements with universal suffrage in the 1920s and Roe v. Wade in 1973. So maybe this arc is headed in the right direction. That is not to say there haven't been some serious setbacks like the one we are experiencing now with the MAGA takeover of the party of Lincoln. But overall, from a macro view of history of humanity, how do you think we're doing? Jim, how are we doing here? Now, you can be both pessimistic and optimistic. Just
Yeah,
be
okay.
yourself.
By the way, your quote from Parker was an answer on Jeopardy last week.
I don't watch Jeopardy.
It's the only one I ever got right, too. So, I say, let's go back earlier than Parker. Kant described a moral imperative, which we're all supposed to understand is the basis for morality. He did this in the same year that Napoleon had to move his army, and Napoleon moved his army all the way to Russia. So there's something on both sides of the equation. Your examples in your question are a little bit harder for me. I like this question, but this is gonna be a same thing as I was doing with Antietam, I think, at least to a certain degree. They're a little harder to justify in terms of the moneyed interests and as history written by the winners. But taken from the side of modern historians, the Magna Carta conveniently solidified the concept that the church could not be taxed or governed by a king. It wasn't as altruistic as one would like to believe, even in part.
I said a teeny tiny bit.
Well, let's take women's suffrage. Women's suffrage came at a politically convenient time, 1920, owing, I think it was 1920, owing to the idea that the great number of men had died in the war and demographics actually favored women. Harding became president and immediately promised a return to normalcy. And also, women's suffrage had been started and it was a very large movement in 1848. Nobody remembers that. And here's the big one. If freeing the slaves would help the cause of the North, Lincoln was determined to free them. We all know that. He also said that if freeing the slaves would not help, he would not have done it. His initial view of slaves and slavery was that they should all be deported to Liberia. So what I'm pointing out is there are particular viewpoints that we have that we think are based on history that looked upon, that should be looked upon from the standpoint of the truth as to what they're saying in order to be able to try and determine whose truths they were at whatever particular time.
Yeah, but the question is, how are we doing? As far as, are we getting better at things, or I mean, we can dabble in different historical aspects of it, but
Right, which I thought was my job.
yeah, you do that a lot, buddy.
Yeah.
Trust me on that. But you think we're doing okay here as far as developing our humanity, our social construct.
Okay, here's where I get positive. I am positive. I have a set of beliefs myself that say there has to be more good in the world, at least marginally, than bad. If there weren't, it would have been extinct thousands of years ago. Are there examples of that? It's hard to come up with a solid feeling that this is accelerating or even getting any better than it has been throughout the course of history. Why? Because the 8 billion people that we have here, from a standpoint of trying to follow percentages or even guess at what they are, is a very difficult game. All I know from my own particular perspective of my life and lives around me, I'm retired, have been retired, wish I'd retired a lot longer than that. Once I get away from the politics, once I get away from the television, once I get away from the internet, once I get away from all of that stuff, I find life on a local level where I am living, and I have lived in the city as well as the suburbs, to be better than it was when I was a kid. So anecdotally, I'm on the side of positive.
Okay, Thaddeus. Jim makes a great point. If it was all bad, then we'd be extinct. So we're not extinct, so things must be going okay.
Yeah, well, how are we doing? Sometimes I think this is the best time and the worst time to ask that question, because if we're talking about the moral arc, the arc of the universe points toward the good. Maybe it does, but it's hardest to see when we have just taken giant leaps backwards.
Mhm.
And so, this is, we live in discouraging times, or as the Chinese say, interesting times. But I won't give in to the temptation to think that we're all going to hell in a handbasket. I have hopes, but we're right now, I think we're looking for a tipping point where there are enough people who are standing up and saying, we need to be in control of our governance, our destiny. And so far, we still have the majority, I think, in the world, a majority of people are still somnolent. Or we've got to get more people to wake up and realize that governance is a participatory sport for everyone, and sitting on the sidelines and watching isn't going to help. So, it's sort of like a massive get out the vote, but the vote just doesn't just happen on a Tuesday every 4 years. We're voting for ourselves every day we're alive, and if we're not taking part in that, then we are letting it slip away from us. So,
Okay, Thaddeus throws in some realistic points about how we can manage the future. But Monica, you're the perfect person to end up on this question, because you're such an optimist. So how are we doing?
Well, I'm going to be a pessimist here. Okay. The tides are turning. The Wheel of Fortune, it goes up, it goes down. And I think one of the most pertinent examples we can point to is Roe v. Wade. I would be remiss as a woman to not mention that it just got overturned. which is it's so mind-blowing to me that I think I personally and even professionally, I talk to it comes up, my students do research papers, and inevitably someone is always wanting to do research on this question. And I'm like, it's an age-old question. It's been settled. Why are we reinventing? What more can be said? But to their, I guess to their credit, it is something that is ongoing and it was just overturned. So it is something that I think is a marker in our arc of the moral universe, in terms of ethics and where we're headed and where we're reverting backwards in time. We just had a vote on marriage equality, something that we thought had just settled in, 2016 or 8, whatever, over when Obama was presiding. We thought this was a done deal, and then we're yet having to do some kind of amendments to secure that right to be able to marry the people that we love, whether LGBT or racially or what have you. So this scares me. This scares me that today in 2022, in the most recent weeks and months, we're going back to things that we thought were settled in the civil rights acts of, starting in 63 to 70, that we thought were done deals. And we're revisiting these same conversations. We're revisiting the same legislature. We're fighting for this. In 2020, 2021, there were so many laws, legislation put up against trans people in the LGBT community. It was, you talk about DeSantis in Florida, the anti-gay laws and legislation. I don't even know what's happening. I'm like aghast. And it's unspeakable to me. So I think we're slipping. I think we're slipping. And I think the right people are standing up and giving voice and fighting, and certainly the youth. But it's kind of like harkens back to, what Jim said earlier about Lincoln and the Emancipation Act of 1865. And then immediately following, we have the Black Codes enacted that restricted. Like, we're going forward and backwards at the same time. I am worried at the state of where we are right now. It is concerning. It is most concerning that Roe v. Wade was just overturned. And I still haven't processed it for myself. It's unspeakable. And the fact that the people who have overturned this, there's no further motions or actions about there. It's just on some minute principle of, where life begins. And there's no forethought or afterthought to like what happened when the child was born. There's no thought about women who incurred rape or incest. I can go on and on, just on a tangent. So I'm going to stop myself because I'm impassioned about this, and it is scary. It is scary to me where we're at right now.
Well, there are a lot of states where women are just like they're stuck. Even in Indiana, where this 10-year-old girl from Ohio had to flee to, the attorney general there is trying to prosecute this doctor. So okay. Throw that in, because the arc isn't always as hopeful as Martin Luther King stated there.